And I think the commission as a whole is also making structural changes so we don't fall into the past. I think President Picker has made significant reforms. There's additional reforms being put forward by the legislature. The governor's office is working on it. So we can fix the structure of the commission so that we don't fall in the same as we did in the past.
Okay. One of the things, if you look at the division and the vision and kind of the role, in the role on the last sentence of role before we get to the goals for the first year, it says the ultimate goal of the division, and the last part of that sentence says also keep the utility accountable by reviewing its asset inspection schedules and risk mitigation claims. Isn't that the Safety Enforcement Division's role right now? Isn't that what they do?
They do. What we like to do is we like to work with the Safety Enforcement Division engineers and use their information and integrate it into testimony, so it's in the formal record.
I see. Okay.
Right now, that's technical advice, informal advice given to commissioners and given to ALJs, and it's not part of the record.
I have a couple of questions that if I could ask kind of the whole panel, if anyone has any thoughts. That San Bruno did not happen because PG&E didn't get enough money in the rate cases. I mean, that we know. It happened because its management had no idea what they were doing. They were spending on well integrity at Aliso Canyon was not challenged in Southern California Gas's rate case before that well failure. So my first question to all of you is the rate case the problem? Is that where we should be talking about and looking at this in the rate case, or are there other areas that we should be focusing on?
Well, I'll start. The rate cases definitely could be better. I agree with a lot of the panelists. I agree with Mark that we all could be doing a better job. Maybe it's just because I've been spending so much of the last 2 years on these quantitative model issues. I'm hoping that can help. The real problem in the rate case that I've perceived is just the complete lack of transparency of why the utilities chose to do the work that they're presenting. They just come up with, it's like this magical list of things. I mean, there's testimony explaining everything, but it all comes down, when it's safety, they say, this is important for safety. That's the bottom line. This is important for safety. Well, how do we know that important for safety program is less or more important than the other 27 programs they're proposing? And a rate case done right is the opportunity for the commission to ask the hard questions about whether you're targeting the limited money in the right places. Now, when I say limited money, the reason I'm saying that is because people are having trouble in this state affording their utility bills. Disconnections for PG&E are on the rise significantly, and so we have to think about whether people can afford the utility service. It's not like we're saying constrain the budgets, just saying recognize that there have to be limitations. So that's a rate case done right can be the opportunity to determine in a transparent way whether the utilities are focusing on the right things to address the right safety risks.
And how do we get at those things that are not in the rate case?
Well,
this not listed, not presented in the rate cases. Is there something missing here?
And this is how the quantitative models can help, because, and this is where I hope a division such as is being proposed can help, that we can all work together looking over the shoulders of the utilities and asking the hard questions. And the more expertise we have, engineering expertise is great. They're not easy to find, by the way. But we need as many experts looking over the shoulders of the utilities and questioning their assumptions and judgments that go into these risk scores.
But, Dr. Mitchell, okay. I think you
have I think that I totally agree with Tom that the rate cases are where the rubber hits the road. That's where money gets turned into safety or doesn't. However, you have a lot of issues that span the entire state. There are gas companies all over California. There are wildfires all over California. There are common sets of risks, and there's a common set of expertise. And if everything is focused on specific issues for specific utilities, we're also participants in the SMAP proceeding with TURN. What we hear the utilities say over and over again is, "Oh, we're unique. Oh, you can't really compare us with anybody else. We're special. We have so many unique risks," but it's not really true. I mean, there are standard, people are using standard components. People are exposed to Santa Ana winds and sundowner winds and different types of weather conditions. There needs to be some sort of repository for this risk information, and the Commission needs to provide leadership as this repository. Also, being able to identify new risks, emergent risks, stuff that nobody has ever considered before. And that's important because if you look at the big disasters, are almost always from stuff you didn't really expect it to happen that way. You always learn something new. So being able to identify emergent risks early and identify and act on them, we need a central place to do that, whether it's this division, something else. I don't know. I mean, there's a risk assessment unit. I'm still trying to figure out what the differences in responsibility are between these units. Especially, I noticed that it's sort of morphed from Division of Safety Advocates to Division of Safety Analysis, which makes it sound more overlapping with the risk assessment unit. So, I mean, for me, I'm not quite sure, where the home for this repository is, but I think it needs to be within the Commission, and I think it needs to be a priority and funded appropriately.
May I respond?
Of course.
So I'm not sure that I'd say that there's a problem with the rate case. I tend to agree with Tom that we need to, as interveners, we need to focus a lot more on the SMAP proceeding and the RAMP proceeding. The SMAP is the safety modeling assessment proceeding, and the RAMP is the risk assessment mitigation proceeding. Now, if we identify the right risks as a group, and we understand the utilities safety models, by the time that information gets to the general rate case, then everyone's on the same page. The problem has been is that, as Tom said, the utilities come in with 14 boxes of testimony and says, "Give us this much money," and no one understands why they need that money. And this is why we started the SMAP and the RAMP proceeding. So we begin to look past just what their testimony is and see how they came up with that risk, how they identified the risk, what are the mitigation efforts in place, and how would the dollars reduce the risk that they're identifying. As far as your question on the risk assessment unit and the Division of Safety Analysis, the risk assessment unit is housed in Safety and Enforcement Division, and they provide the technical advice to commissioners and to the ALJs. And they also do implementation of decisions. What they don't do right now is providing the testimony in the rate case. And as I did if you look at the PowerPoint, the Division of Safety Analysis will do the best practices throughout the Commission and that testimony, working with, hopefully, as a team of interveners.
Mark?
Senator Hill, your question raised a really important point. We've been hearing, and we agree with the idea that the rate case is forward-looking, and we want the output of the rate case to be based to a much larger extent than it is now on safety analysis. But that's not the end of the story, because the final link in the chain is, okay, the utility gets the right amount of money. Do they spend it in the right place? And that's, yes, that's where it's not that the rate case process itself has a problem. It's the actions of the Commission. It's the decision of the commissioners where they are not following through on what we think they should be doing. And we are hopeful that, an intervener focused on safety will help raise the voice that say, look, a certain portion of the rate case revenue that you're getting, this pot of money, is specifically intended to address safety issues. You either have to spend it on safety or you have to give it back. You can't divert it to something else. Now, with very limited exceptions, the utilities have complete freedom to spend this pot of money on anything they want or not spend it at all and pocket the money. And the commission has at its disposal regulatory tools, balancing accounts, to limit the amount to which money can be shifted around. It's been used for a long time in tree trimming. For decades, it's been used in tree trimming. But it's rarely used in other circumstances, and there's no good reason for that. And we ask for it often. We get it rarely. We're hopeful that with another voice saying, look, a portion of this pot of money is designed for safety. You either spend it there or you give it back. You can't divert it.
And I almost think that giving it back isn't an option either. If it's for safety and it's incumbent upon the PUC and the commissioners to make sure the system is safe, therefore they should require them to spend that money on those safety issues. Because that, I mean, I know the process is giving it back, but that shouldn't be.
There's a little bit of a nuance here. I mean, the money is given based on projections. You know, how much does it cost per unit of activity? Right. If they can do it for less money, that's great. They shouldn't be forced to spend the money. They should be required to do the task.
Yes.
But, you know, if the commission overestimates how much money it is,
then they should give. That's very
yes.
true. So, okay, you know, and we're kind of going around this issue a little bit, but is the problem that safety isn't in the record, or that the safety is secondary in decision making?
It's very much lacking in the record. You know, with the exception of a very few of us, that's not what people are submitting testimony on. They're submitting testimony on, oh, you should make your estimates based on the 5-year average of prior spending or the 3-year average of prior spending, or what's the trend look like? Right. Not what's the underlying substantive thing you're doing, and is that enough? Is it too much? Is it too little?
And the Strumwasser report from last year found that even commissioners didn't know where to go to look to find this information.
Because it's not there.
Yeah. So what's most important? Scoping, testimony, briefing, or ex parte communications?
I would say, and to its credit, the commission is working on this with the SMAP and the RAMP, is getting the utilities to put their requests in a way that we can all transparently understand why they made the choices they did and make alternative choices, make alternative proposals about how to spend the money. That's why we get this disjointed record that Mark is talking about, because again, how do you respond to a utility when they just say everything is important for safety and you don't have any way to know how they rank and prioritize them?
Interesting. Is it your opinion that a dedicated safety intervener would change the expertise gap? That, if you remember the independent review panel that was part of the PUC, that they identified, is that, do you think that safety intervener would change the expertise gap? What do you think, Connie?
Well, I would like to comment on that, because I think clearly there's high levels of expertise within the existing structure, and I don't think we question that. I think, as Marzia said, it's a matter of, in part, getting that information into the record in the appropriate way. But we believe that there is a need for additional and separate expertise that is not nuanced in its testimony or in its participation by the structure or by leadership of the commission, as you indicated before. We share the fear that a different type of leadership could reemerge, and that this structure needs to be able to sustain itself and to withstand any type of potential interference. So we agree that there's both a wealth of existing safety expertise, but that critically needs to be supplemented from an independent source in order to balance out the record.
Would you agree, Tom?
Well, you're talking about something that academics talk about in regulatory proceedings. It's called the information asymmetry problem, which is the utilities have all the information about their systems, and the rest of us are trying to climb the learning curve, and it's not easy. So that's another reason why we can see more resources for the commission. An agency that a division like that's been being proposed could be useful, but when we talk about getting independent outside experts, when I talk about that, I mean experts that are not hired guns for the utility industry, because that is another risk. Most of the experts that do this kind of work for the utilities, and their resumes, if you look at their resumes, 95% of their work is for the gas industry or the electric industry. That's where the money is.
Right, of course.
And they don't want to burn bridges with the hand that feeds them. So
Ben, how would you suggest that the PUC get sufficient expertise to,
well, that's why
weigh
I
in
did
on
caution
those
that
proposals?
it's not easy to find. But an entity like the division that's being proposed in a state agency is a marker to the community that there's going to be somebody out there that can pay your bills and be for someone who wants to do independent work, that doesn't want to be beholden to the utilities point of view. And I hope other states will do this. So we'll develop a new industry, a new opportunity for consultants who want to do independent analysis and not get paid by the utilities to do their work.
Yeah, well, that's very good. And Mr. Joseph, you seem to indicate at the safety en banc that some utilities have better employee reporting programs than others. Employee reporting of safety issues gets at the heart of not only hazard identification but of safety culture. How do we know if a utility has an effective employee reporting system? And should the PUC get involved if a utility does not have a good, robust system?
The answer to the first question, how do you know, is ask the employees. They'll tell you whether they feel free to really make suggestions, and whether we talked about earlier, whether they can make the suggestions without fear of retaliation, and whether they will be paid attention to. PG&E has, done a 180 on this, and it's fully in. Yes, to the good. It was, I remember meeting with employees in 2007, 2008 timeframe, gas side employees, and they were very frustrated because they were playing second fiddle to the electric side, and their concerns were not being heard, and leak surveys were not being done properly, and a whole list of things which we heard about later, and it's been completely transformed, and that's ultimately dependent on leadership with the utility.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I've heard, and that may be true, I've heard that there have been, and this is talking with a few employees, that there's still a fear factor at PG&E of retaliation for coming forward on things. And I mean, I don't know how true it is, but it was relayed to me a couple of times.
Anybody who has a supervisor is always concerned about what the supervisor is going to think.
Right.
You can't eliminate it at 100%. But it's so much better than it used to be. It's really been a sea change.
Oh, that's good to hear. The last question I had is kind of, during the San Bruno penalty proceeding, we got a firsthand look of how a utility can get PUC management to influence a proceeding on its behalf. The legal division went into revolt, and the PUC's general counsel was quietly retired because of that fiasco we kind of watched. But I want to get your thoughts. And how do we feel about a safety intervener in rate cases or elsewhere answerable to PUC management? I mean, is there a fear? I mean, here again, as I mentioned before, there's a comfort level I think we all feel today. But is that a fear going forward at some point in time we're back in the same position because of the structure and because of frankly, the power of the president of the PUC that hasn't changed?
I can imagine that a division, which I think is the right place to start, could evolve into an office like ORA with a director separately appointed by the governor. And so answerable not to the commission president with a budget that's separate. that would be useful structural change so that we don't have, some future leadership of the commission taking things down the wrong path, or less chance of it. That's probably too much to bite off right at the beginning.
Okay, that's good. Any other thoughts on that?
I would just echo the comments that I made earlier that we agree. I'm not really in a position of expertise to be able to evaluate whether that is too much to bite off. I would accept that, but certainly that needs to be a near-term goal because we have seen the bad results. We're very pleased and appreciative of the good work that is currently occurring and the focus that has emerged. But the results of failed leadership have so much consequence that we would have to continue to believe that the independence in a manner that is currently the structure with ORA has a better chance of survival. We all know that testimony and discussions occur that's fundamental to the process. Those have to be vetted with the leadership in any organization. For that leadership to be separate and independent, we believe is critical if safety is going to get its due.
Okay, very good. Yes.
I think that's my concern, is that I think a lot of punches get pulled now in certain divisions of the commission to just not ruffle the feathers of the utilities, and that's the debate about whether this division would just be a punch-pulling division that just wouldn't speak plainly when it views the utilities as going in the wrong direction. I would have been even more concerned about that a couple of years ago under the previous leadership. So maybe for now, like Mark, we'd be willing to give it a go without ORH-style independence. But I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of years from now we were here before you saying this division should be made independent, just like ORA.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. We're going to open this if the public would like to make a comment, so we need to make a little room up here for them, if that's all right. And then I have a few closing comments that I wanted to make. Is there anyone who would like to share their thoughts that hasn't already? Well, we don't have to worry about that. So we won't have the public comment, or there's no one here speaking on behalf of the public. I think that this has been very informative, and I think what we've seen is that the questions raised about having a safety advocate at the PUC have as much to do with how the PUC handles safety in the absence of a safety advocate as with the safety advocate proposal itself. We should also recognize that, as we've seen, I think very clearly, this is just one piece of the larger issue of how the state addresses safety across its infrastructure. And certainly the utilities are a major infrastructure for California. We're asking difficult questions of the PUC. That's our job. But in some senses, the PUC might be ahead of other agencies in the way it's trying to address safety oversight. And I think that's encouraging and certainly a welcome sight. But I'm not comfortable with that the PUC has sufficiently articulated, even internally, the safety roles and responsibilities of its existing staff. And I think that would be helpful to do too. But I don't think that's unique, certainly, in what we've seen around the state. As a state, we have a fairly good idea of how to coordinate emergency response, but I think the Aliso Canyon and Butte fire incidents have shown that we're not nearly as effective at coordinated accident prevention. The PUC is at the center of all of this, and that's why it's so important that the PUC gets this right. No agency, not even the PUC, is an island, but all are part of the main. I know that Senator Pavley's Natural Resources Committee, Senator Hueso's Energy Committee, and Senator Wolk's Budget Subcommittee will continue to work with our partners in the Assembly and the Governor's Office to address these safety issues as we move forward this year. And I hope this has been a service today, this hearing. It was very beneficial for me and I think for everyone to really grasp and get an idea of what's proposed and how to kind of flush out how that advocate position would be and the analysis and the role it would play. So thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate traveling as you did to make it, and for your insight and expertise in the subject area. So thank you very much. The hearing's adjourned.